most of us recognize that the history of the Jewish people is filled with individuals who have had a great impact on the world around them. It is even safe to say that this has been true well beyond mere proportionality of population. Our guest has studied this record and has published his perception of which of these outstanding individuals have had the greatest impact. He has published the results of this study, and while it performs a very useful service in terms of the information it presents, it also raises a number of interesting questions. To introduce us to this fascinating study of some of the most important Jews of history, we have invited Michael Shapiro, author of The Jewish 100, a ranking of the most influential Jews of all time, to join us for this Judaism Today presentation, which we've entitled The Jewish 100. Welcome to Judaism Today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
How did you get interested into this kind of thing? And why specifically the most influential?
Well, the story is mundane, regrettably, because you would think I had a great inspiration for this, but it didn't happen that way. A friend of mine is a sports writer by the name of Burt Randolph Sugar, who writes for many boxing publications, was bemoaning the fact to me on the train one day that he needed to find a new publisher. So I said, you should meet a friend of mine who owns Carroll Publishing, Stephen Schragus, who recently sold Spy magazine and bought Lyle Stewart and named it Carroll Publishing. We went to a bar, and over drinks and lunch, it was decided that Burt Sugar would write a book for Steve Schragus about the 100 greatest sports heroes. And leaving the restaurant, Stephen said to me, well, why don't you write the one about Judaism, since you're so active in Jewish life? And I wrote the Jewish 100. And it preceded Burt's book by a year. Burt's book just came out. And it's done an international business, let's put it that way.
How did you organize, how did you make these judgments? What criteria did you use?
That's the first question people often ask me, because it's a ranking. The book, The Jewish 100, is a ranking of the most influential Jews of all time. Not great, not good, not evil, necessarily. Some of those things, but influential. So first I had to decide who are the, in quotes, most influential Jews, and rank them into the Jewish 100. Rank them in order of influence. So I thought of fields or spheres of human endeavor. For example, the Bible, obviously, post-biblical era, then politics, science, and science, so many sub-species, sub-chapters, let's say, medicine and physics and you name it, sports, music, art, all the spheres of human endeavor. And then I look for the people who are, and to use a German word, the Ur figures, the foundation figures, the people that started it all, perhaps, in their particular sphere of human endeavor. It's fairly easy to do in fields that you may know. But then try to rank them one against the other. And then fields against each other. Is a biblical figure more important than a musical figure? Is a scientific figure more important than a sports figure? So how did I do it? With great pain. And the list is much more than the Jewish 100. It's the Jewish 500 or the Jewish 1,000. In music alone, it's extraordinary. But again, influence, not greatness, and one man's opinion. The Jewish 100 is not an encyclopedia. It's a book of speculation, of opinion, of hope, and of regret in certain cases. But it's very much one man's opinion.
Lest people get the idea that it's just a list of names. Obviously, it's more than a list of names, because you take each person and you really explain why you feel what was unique about and important about their contribution.
No question. I mean, it's not an encyclopedia. Encyclopedia Judaica or the World Book or the Britannica, terrific reference text to find most of the people in this book. This book is not a recitation of every fact in their life. Some major facts are left out on purpose, because I went to the facts that made them influential, that changed world history, not just Jewish history, but world history. And that's what made it so interesting. So the ranking is a method to get people to argue, perhaps even to get the author onto talk shows, but not quite. It's an instruction, it's a tool to get people to think. Most people will not read a history, a conventional history, even if it's a great book. They're bored. History, it's so boring. But tell him a list. Ah, well, did he include this one? Did he exclude that one? Is that one there? Why is that one not there? And then they start thinking, and they start debating. So my book is, in essence, interactive, like a CD-ROM, in a sense.
Getting into your list,
Yeah.
like number one.
Yeah.
Number one, you picked Moses. What is it about Moses that makes him number one?
Well, just this past week, there was an article in Time magazine about the Bible and whether people existed or not who were in the Bible. It's very interesting. Moses, one of the figures they say perhaps didn't, was invented. I don't believe that. My reason for selecting Moses is that he's the fundamental figure in civilization. Not just Jewish civilization, but a world civilization. We should say Western civilization, because my book is very much centered on Western civilization. Jewish and Christian influence has had not the great effect on Eastern civilization that perhaps Islam has had. But Moses, getting back to your question to answer it, without Moses there's no law. Without Moses people cannot live with each other, because we need laws to survive each other. And Mosaic law is the foundation of our society, of world civilization. Now you're going to ask me about number two?
Well, that's obviously the next question.
Yeah.
Because there are several questions that really it brings up. Number two, and I see you laughing, is Jesus.
Obviously.
Jesus of Nazareth.
Yes.
One question is, do we consider him Jewish?
Undoubtedly.
Okay.
Without question.
Now, could you explain that?
Well, he was never anything but Jewish. Joshua ben Joseph, no question. And his teachings are Hillel. They're basically the teachings of Hillel, who I'm sure he heard, and I'm sure he was at debates between Shammai and Hillel, it being such a small community at the time. There's no question that he was brought up in that tradition.
Would you say, and I know you're not an authority on halacha, but would you say that even halachically, one would have to say that at least for most of his life he was Jewish?
Fundamentally, his entire life, from what we know.
Even halachically?
Oh, I would say so, sure. And a lot of what he did was very much in the mainstream. I should say mainstream, but it was very much in the rebellious spirit of the Essenes, for example, the period. Whether he was an Essene or not, part of the Qumran sect, who knows? But the essence of what he did and what he thought and what he said is Judaic.
It's interesting, though, that in the list of 100 most influential Jews, the second one is Jesus of Nazareth.
Well, the big issue is,
but you're right,
should Saul of Tarsus be number two? St. Paul, who really created Christianity out of a Jewish concept. Whether he should be number two and Jesus lower down would, I think, be going too far. But his position and what he accomplished as a Pharisaic Jew, fascinating, Saul of Tarsus, is immeasurable.
One that I have to tell you really surprised me. You had Anne Frank up very high.
Absolutely.
Why?
William Hoffman, who's a friend of mine, is a playwright, who's written wonderful plays about AIDS and about Jewish issues, said to me recently that there will be a new book of the Torah, or as he put it, or the Bible. And he calls it the Book of the Shoah. In a sense, I think it's an illuminating thought. Through Anne Frank, we, people who were not there, can have access, to some degree, to the terrible terror of our people's lives and deaths and murders during that period. Without her, I don't think we would have that access. Furthermore, her book is in the top 5 books translated in the history of the world.
Is it really?
Yeah, along with the Bible and Chairman Mao's book. It's in almost every language. Where people read, Anne Frank's book exists. And kids who don't know anything about Judaism know Anne Frank. And that's a good thing. So that's why she's my second most influential woman. My first cannot be debated in my mind, and it's Mary. Mary, or Miriam, whatever she was called, did not choose to be influential, but was. And it's interesting what was made of her life, especially by the medieval church, makes her the most influential Jewish woman of all time.
Who were some of the other people that you toyed with for number one?
No, no one. It was Moses.
So it was hands down Moses from the beginning.
I would have preferred to have put Jesus number one, to tell you the truth. And if Jesus had been number one, then there would have been peace in the world. His message would have been listened to. But I say in the book quite bluntly that the message of peace, which is a wonderful, great message of Hillel and of Jewish thought, which Jesus amplified in such a great way, was not listened to by the multitudes with the Crusades and the Inquisition and the I can never pronounce it, but the massacres in Russia in the late
Pogroms.
1600s. Well, in the 1600s I'm talking about. And then the pogroms and, of course, the Shoah. If Jesus' message had been listened to, many of our relatives would still be alive, and there would be generations of people. An interesting statistic: if Jews were allowed to live over the past 2,000 years without massacre, there would be 80 million Jews in the world today.
Wow.
That's the population of Germany. Wow. So I would have preferred to have put him number one, but it didn't work.
We have to take a break. We'll be back in just 1 minute to continue our Judaism Today presentation, The Jewish 100, with our guest, Michael Shapiro.
Can you imagine what the American flag would look like if it had no red in it, and no blue in it, and no white in it? It wouldn't look like an American flag at all, would it? Well, the American people are a lot of different colors, just like the American flag. So if you took away the red ones, and the black ones, and the yellow ones, and the white ones, and the brown ones, there wouldn't be any America left. And then where would you be? Prejudice is something America can do without.
It shouldn't really matter if a Chinese American talked like this.
Or if a Swedish American looked like this.
Because if you are a real American, you would not even care.
But some people here believe that everyone should look and talk and think the same way they do, or they should not be living in the same place.
A man called Adolf Hitler felt the same way.
Prejudice is something America can do without.
Welcome back to our Judaism Today presentation, The Jewish 100, with our guest, Michael Shapiro. Who would you consider to be the most controversial person on the list?
Controversy is a tough thing, but certainly Trotsky is the reason for much hate in the world, especially during the Nazi period. The image of Trotsky before the German soldier that was depicted by the Nazis, by the Germans, was what threw them into Russia to kill the Judaic communists. And Trotsky, in many ways, while a major figure in Russian history certainly, was a cancer for our people. So controversial, yes. The other person is a person who may never have existed, but I have a very, very strong chapter on him, and it's Judas Iscariot. Judas, the knife man.
Stereotypical.
The knife man. Well, as the stereotype.
Yeah.
And the use of him by so many politicians and priests and haters throughout the centuries as an archetype for all people that can be scapegoated. So, especially Jewish people. So the Judas Iscariot certainly is up there.
Could you tell us about your number 100 choice? That was also a fascinating.
Well, it's fascinating because to me it was obvious. I grew up in the 50s when most kids learned how to read by reading comic books. My children love superheroes, like most children today love superheroes. And my father read Superman in the 30s. Now, Superman is a curiously Hebraic-sounding alien. His name in Krypton is Kal-El, which is light of God, it's been translated, but it's a Hebrew word. And the fascinating thing is it's a typical Jewish story of an immigrant fleeing a country that's blowing up, in this case a world, comes to America, puts on glasses, and gets a job. But really, on the side, does good. It's a very Jewish story. And the interesting thing is most of the superheroes, Batman created by Bob Kane, Spider-Man and the Hulk created by Stan Lee were created by Jewish men. The further story is Superman in German is Übermensch. Getting back again to this German connection, Siegel and Schuster, two German-American Jews, create in the 30s, reading the paper about what's happening in Europe, an American Superman who, during the 40s, fought Nazis, it turns out, in a lot of newsreels. A lot of comic strips, certainly. So Superman is a Jewish archetype.
But why would you consider them to be so influential?
Well, I don't consider pop culture less influential than high culture. I have Gustav Mahler in my book and Leonard Bernstein. But I also have Steven Spielberg and Siegel and Schuster. I don't feel that and Bob Dylan, that pop culture is...
And Harry Houdini.
Oh, Harry Houdini, of course. The first great show, well, other than Barnum, of course, America's greatest showman in the early days. And the man who created mass entertainment, really, in this century, was Harry Houdini.
So you feel that, I guess by reaching so many, especially young people, with the values that Superman represents...
Well, they're good values, aren't they?
Absolutely.
They're values that are...
In fact, things that we could really use today, which we seem to have gotten away from.
Yeah. He talks about brotherhood, about people doing good for the poor. I mean, it's all the things that we care about.
The responsibility to help straighten things out.
So Superman is certainly my 100th Jew of the Jewish 100.
Interesting.
It's very interesting.
But you don't claim Superman was Jewish, though.
Well, I think Siegel and Schuster said so.
Can we speak of who your personal favorite?
Maimonides.
And
Clearly.
why?
Well, number one, the mind. Maimonides is the Shakespeare. Well, Rashi may be the Shakespeare. I'm not sure what Maimonides is, but he's the greatest thinker in my mind in the history of Judaism. And his personal story is so fascinating, with the flight from Spain into Africa and the settling near Cairo in a place called Fostat, taking care of the Sultan's kids during the day and then schlepping back to Fostat at night, and then taking care of, as a doctor, as a physician, the common folk who would line up waiting for him to come home. And then after that, he'd write the commentaries. Think about it. And write, of course, the perplexed.
The thing that frankly, when you speak of him, what strikes me is that he represents a certain model of the blend of the rational and the spiritual.
And irrational. That's what I love about him.
In a very wholesome way.
Terrific. But he's a dynamic thinker, and he's a thinker that to a large extent has been pushed aside by orthodoxy. People don't realize also that Maimonides had a worldwide influence. He was thought of after Hippocrates as the greatest physician in the history of the world. That was his second, and beyond that, he influenced Christian thinkers as well, who read him in Hebrew.
They say from his practice as a doctor that he was also quite brilliant.
Richard the Lionhearted wanted to buy him from the head Sultan, and was turned down.
As a doctor?
As a doctor.
You mentioned Trotsky before. Would you say that he is the most influential in the negative sense? Or
No.
Is there some...
I'd have to think about that. The great thing about the Jewish 100...
who has done the most harm?
I think Trotsky did a lot. Certainly did a lot. Some people would say that my number 4, Sigmund Freud, did a lot of harm, although I don't think so.
Why do you put him so high?
Because I put Einstein number 3 and Freud number 4, clearly because I think their influence is going to continue for thousands of years. Einstein made the world understand the outside world, and Freud did the opposite, the world of the inside, and made us look into it. Whether or not either of the gentlemen's theories are right or wrong, Einstein's are continually being proven to be correct. Whether Freud's theories on sexuality, etc., are correct or not, unimportant. It's the influence. It's what they opened up.
But he pioneered a course.
Pandora's box or not, but influence, not greatness. The Jewish 100, again, who changed the way we live and think.
In looking at some of the people in the field of sports, you mentioned Sandy Koufax.
Yeah.
What was so
I put Sandy Koufax
special
in because
about him?
my publisher insisted I put Sandy Koufax in.
Everybody knows his
not
famous, playing on Yom Kippur.
Well, the famous incident, he did not play on Yom Kippur, and Don Drysdale did pitch, and the Twins hit him early. And Walter Alston came out, and Drysdale threw the ball at him and said, "Walt, don't you wish I was Jewish too?" If he wouldn't have pitched that day. But I would have put Hank Greenberg in if it had been my choice, because Hank Greenberg really changed things, and I think paved the way also for Jackie Robinson, frankly. But my publisher insisted I could choose 99. One, he wanted Sandy Koufax. And Sandy Koufax I adore, but I would have chosen Hank Greenberg. The other sports person in there is much more interesting, is Daniel Mendoza, who's from the 1700s and created scientific boxing. The feinting and the moving of the head, that was all created by one fighter, because before him, boxers used to just pummel each other randomly. And this Sephardic Jew of English birth discovered how to bob and weave. He was the earliest Muhammad Ali.
There are a number of people that you bring from the musical world.
Yeah.
George Gershwin.
Certainly.
Leonard Bernstein.
Yes.
One of the things that I wonder, and I hope that as you've gone through this experience, you must have drawn some conclusions, some overviews where is there a common thread? Is there a common denominator? Is there something in the Jewish way of looking at things that seems to weave its way through all of these people? Is there something that's common?
All of the Jewish 100, even if they were atheists or anti-Semites like Karl Marx, all was spiritual. They might not have believed in God, but they were spiritual. They had a spirituality about them. And all of them, including Sandy Koufax with his spiritual curveball, were spiritual. There was an intensity about them and a direction. Whether they liked it or not, there are a few examples like Dreyfus and Mary, who didn't choose to be influential, but because of circumstances were. And maybe the circumstances gave them that added spirituality, although in Dreyfus's case, I'm not sure.
You've mentioned Mary a couple of times, and what is it about her that you seem to be interested in?
Well, without Mary, there would not be the church of today. I don't think the church would have lasted.
Now, are you speaking of the mere fact that she gave birth to Jesus, or more
the
than
use of her by the church?
What she
represents. She didn't choose to be influential. I mean, even the New Testament will make that clear. But the church before the Virgin was made into the idolatry of the Virgin was developed, was a very severe place. It was a place of death, of Christianity, it's been said by A.N. Wilson, of the resurrection. But there was a confusion in the Middle Ages whether the Norse gods or whatever other gods, the non-Christian gods, were the ones where people wanted to worship. When they brought the figure of Mary into the church, the mother, it changed the church. It warmed it up. Even today, especially Mediterranean women, will go over to the icon of Mary, bypassing Jesus in the church. It's quite fascinating. She's thought to be the one who will solve the problems. And there's a human connection.
We only have a couple of minutes left.
Yes.
There are other things you do in your
Yes,
life
I do.
besides writing this book.
Well, I write music.
What else do you do?
Well, I want to mention that in Westfield, New Jersey, on January 20th, my guitar concerto is being premiered. I'm a composer.
Okay.
And it's being premiered by the Westfield Symphony at the Presbyterian Church with the great guitarist David Tannenbaum from San Francisco. And that's a Jersey event, January 20, 8 o'clock, Presbyterian Church. But I'm a composer of many works, including many works based on Jewish themes, and I'm also the music consultant to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, where I'm involved in the programming and performing as a pianist of the music, especially of the composers of Teretzin.
Well, I'm really glad that you were able to take the time away from the work that you normally do for this, because it's given us some very interesting insights. We have just a brief time left. If you were to try to talk to children about this long list of Jewish people that have been great, what would you try to say to them? How would you try to relate this to children?
Well, they're the roots of not only Jewish people, but of Christian people and of Muslims. They are the roots of all of us, and I would say that learn from their experiences, because their stories and how they influence the world makes you what you are. You come from these people. They are your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents. They are what we are, for better or for worse, mostly for better.
And I guess by what they stand for, they teach us what's possible.
What's possible, and that we shouldn't give up.
We shouldn't give up. I thank you so much for coming. The book is available.
Barnes & Noble, be often Judaica sections or in Hanukkah tables right now.
Good luck to you with the book.
Thank you very much.
It's been a fascinating conversation, and we appreciate your coming here all the way from Westchester to talk with us.
It's always good to visit
Thank you.
Jersey.
Thank you.